he was already inflicted with wounds, they could have just, stuck a spear in his side also and handed his body to Joseph of Arimathea. So I'm just saying that's the only explanation I have. I mean, I don't know. I mean, in terms of I know how much evidence there is.
So Manu, just a second. For our understanding, we appreciate all that you've said. Now tell me clearly and succinctly, real shortly, what did you think is the best explanation again of what happened to Jesus?
I believe the best explanation would be that since the Quran says God promised Jesus, he said, I will defeat you, and I will ascend you toward me, and I will cleanse you from those who reject it. Because as you can, I mean, as if he was dirty by being around the rejectors of him. That he said I will ascend you toward me. The only explanation would be, but the Quran is very specific. They did not kill him, and they did not crucify him by killing him. So therefore, my only explanation would be, the only possibility is that the two should occur. One is the fact that his life could have been taken by God in the custody of the Romans.
Okay.
And two, if he did not go to his body could have been sent to Joseph of Arimathea, and if they had any, it must have been a cover-up, if we agree on that scenario.
Okay, Manu, let's let Dr. White respond to you.
Okay, Manu, a couple things. First of all, you started off by saying that the message of Muhammad was so great that you believe anything that's found in the Quran. The problem is, again, as I raised the issue, why is it that Muslims for 200 years could not remember anything Muhammad said about those 40 Arabic words? Doesn't it strike you as strange? I mean, there's all sorts of commentary in the Hadith when Muhammad contradicts Christian doctrine on Jesus being the Son of God. I've read all sorts of commentary, not only in the Hadith, but in the Tafsir literature and things like that on that. Why on this one issue is there such silence concerning what Muhammad did? And these 40 Arabic words are not central to Muhammad's message. That was what I was saying there. But secondly, what you just raised as a trying to fit the New Testament evidence with the Quran demonstrates the backwards nature of what you as a Muslim are forced to do. You have to take 40 Arabic words from 600 years later, from 700 miles away by someone who had no first-hand knowledge of what happened, and then overthrow the evidence of the New Testament to try to come up with a way to fit all this stuff together. The reality is you have numerous people testifying to the public execution of Jesus. It's not just Jesus' followers. You have the Jews testifying to this. You have a Roman centurion coming before Pilate and giving his professional testimony that Jesus is dead on the cross. You got to understand something, Manu. Those guys would have been killed if they had given false information. If Jesus had just swooned, that centurion would have lost his life if that had been the case. And so, again, you have unanimous first century sources, multiple sources, and you're saying there's a conspiracy theory based upon 40 Arabic words written 600 years later. Now, Manu, to give you an idea of how hard that is for someone like me to accept, let me ask you to put yourself in the following situation. Let's say you live around the year 1300, and you are a Muslim. You are a follower of the Quran and Muhammad. And a man who lives somewhere in the south of France rises up and says he is a prophet of God. However, he has never read the Quran. He cannot read Arabic, but he says that what he's teaching is consistent therewith. And yet he comes along and says, you need to believe him, and that one of his teachings is that the Hijrah never took place. Now, are you going to accept what somebody says simply because he calls himself a prophet, even though he has no direct access to the Quran? He knows nothing about that. He's 600 or 700 years removed from the events, but he claims to be a prophet. Are you going to believe what he has to say when he says there was no Hijra? Manu? He's gone?
Manu, are you there?
He's gone.
Okay.
Well, hopefully the audience can see the point.
Yeah.
You have someone with no meaningful connection, just rising up, has no knowledge of the backgrounds, none of these things, and says that which all the early Muslims testified to in regards to the historical reality of the Hijra didn't happen. And you believe that simply because he says, I'm a prophet. That's an exact parallel to what you're asking Christians to believe about Muhammad. He wasn't there. He comes 600 years later. He doesn't have any knowledge of the first century sources. He doesn't know the New Testament. He doesn't know what the New Testament teaches. And yet we're supposed to just go, okay, if you say so, we'll believe it. That is anachronistic. It's backwards. And I'm simply telling our Muslim friends, you've got to pick up your game if you're going to try to come up with some way of substantiating that kind of an assertion.
Thank you, Dr. White. Thank you, Manu, for your call. And, you know, Manu and other Muslims still need to answer to us. We're trying to figure out. So essentially you're telling us then that Allah created Christianity by his deception of everyone who was there, or either the enemies or his followers or both. And not only that, if you think about let's just for a moment, just take the prevailing Islamic argument that Allah changed the appearance of Judas, for example, to become like Jesus. They put him on the cross, and Jesus was spirited up to Allah somehow, taken.
And there's nothing in the Quranic text that forces that. And by the way, keep that point. I just want to make one.
Go ahead.
He kept saying that Allah ascended Jesus to himself.
Right.
Rafahu.
Rafahu, raised.
Rafahu. But in the Quran, as Muhammad Assad has said, look up every single reference to Raf, to that root. When it has to do with God and men, it's never God physically raising someone. It's raising them up in the sense of exalting them in the sight of other people. And so that would have to be the one exception in Surah 4:158, even according to Muhammad Assad, whose huge commentary, translation and commentary of the Quran is published by CARE here in the United States.
Amazing. Well, you know, you think about it. Let's just say, for example, that the common, well, like you said, it's not in the Quran, but the common view of most Muslims, Judas, for example, was made to look like Jesus. Jesus was taken up to Allah. He didn't die, and Allah brought him to himself. Judas was thus crucified. But somehow or another, people were confused. There was illusions, but not just one illusion. I mean, mass illusions that took place. And the only way they could explain it, well, this is a miracle of Allah. So Allah essentially...
Or a conspiracy is what Manu just said, basically.
A conspiracy.
A conspiracy.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think he did watch the Da Vinci Code. He mentioned it a couple times. But, you know, so Allah is creating by deception, which is perfectly in keeping with Surah 8:30. Allah is the, Allah khair al-makharina. He's the greatest of all deceivers. And so... Christianity would be started by Allah's deception, but think about how wonderfully complete this deception is. The day of Passover, the day upon which Jesus was killed, or at least at that time, that all of the Jews realized this is a day of a lamb being slain to keep away God's judgment from us. You go back to the Passover, which, of course, in the Quran, the Passover is passed over. You know about that, Dr. White. It's so interesting how they have they have 9 of the 10 plagues, you know. Exactly 9 of the 10 plagues on Egypt are recounted in the Quran, but the 10th plague is missing, the death of the firstborn. The Passover is passed over. But Jesus dies on the Passover. When he comes into the world, the first thing that John the Baptist says when he sees Jesus, by the Spirit of God, behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. Here is the Passover Lamb, Jesus Christ, crucified for us, according to the Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians 5:7. We see that Jesus is that Passover Lamb. He's the suffering servant. He's the Messiah. And this crucifixion of Judas just so happens to be on Passover, when everyone in Jerusalem has a lamb on their shoulders carrying to go be killed, and they're bringing to mind the fact that the blood of an innocent lamb is slain for that house in Egypt, so the death angel would not come and kill the firstborn. Can you imagine? I mean, what depths Allah went to deceive people.